My son died hating me, and I couldn't attend his funeral. My family accused me of being a monster. But his last video revealed the truth that no one knew. I, 46M, never thought I'd be in a position where my entire family would cut contact with me. I've always been the reliable one, the rock everyone leaned on during difficult times. But everything changed 3 weeks ago when I didn't attend my son's funeral. Let me start from the beginning. My son and I had a complicated relationship over the past few years. He was 24 when he passed, and we'd been estranged for nearly 2 years before his death. The estrangement wasn't my choice. He moved out abruptly after a heated argument about his life choices, and despite my attempts to reconnect, he maintained his distance. The news of his accident came through my ex-wife. A car crash, they said, quick and painless. I felt like someone had hollowed out my chest with a rusty spoon. The grief was immediate and overwhelming. I couldn't speak, couldn't think. My current wife held me as I broke down. Then came the funeral arrangements. My ex-wife and her family took charge, which was understandable. They set the date for the following Thursday. And here's where everything went wrong. I told them I couldn't attend. The backlash was immediate and fierce. My ex-wife screamed at me over the phone, calling me heartless. My daughter refused to speak to me. My parents, my siblings, everyone was unified in their disgust. How could a father miss his own son's funeral? What kind of monster was I? I couldn't explain my reasons. Not then. It would have only made things worse. So I endured their contempt, their anger, their disbelief. I sat alone in my house on the day of the funeral, drinking whiskey straight from the bottle while my family gathered to mourn without me. The messages I received afterward were brutal. My brother wrote that I was dead to him. My mother said she had failed in raising me. My daughter sent a single text. I will never forgive you for this. For a week, I existed in a fog of grief and isolation. My wife stood by me, though even she didn't understand why I had made this choice. I couldn't go to work. I barely ate. I stared at old photographs of my son and me. Fishing trips when he was little, his high school graduation, moments when we were still a family. Then, 10 days after the funeral, I received an email. Update 1 asterisk. The email came from a law firm. My son had apparently arranged for certain digital assets to be transferred to me upon verification of his death. I was instructed to visit their office to receive these assets in person. I went the next morning. The lawyer was professional but cold. She handed me a USB drive and an envelope containing the password. She explained that my son had arranged this delivery 6 months before his death, with strict instructions that it could only be given to me. When I got home, I locked myself in my home office. My hands trembled as I plugged in the drive and entered the password. A single video file appeared on the screen. The thumbnail showed my son's face. I hesitated before clicking play. What would he say? Would this be a final message of hatred? A list of my failures as a father? I took a deep breath and pressed play. His face filled the screen. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, but there was a calmness to him I hadn't seen in years. Dad, he began, if you're watching this, then I'm gone. And I know exactly what happened. You didn't attend my funeral. I nearly stopped the video right there. How could he have known? You didn't attend because I asked you not to. In the letter I left for Mom, I specifically requested that my funeral be held on Thursday, March 17th. And I knew you wouldn't be there, because that's the anniversary. My throat tightened. He remembered. I know about the promise you made to her. I know you go to that cliff every year on that day, no matter what. And I wanted you to keep that promise, even for me. Tears streamed down my face as my son continued speaking. The truth is, Dad, I've been angry with you for a long time. Not because you were a bad father. You weren't. But because after all these years, I still couldn't compete with a ghost. Update 2 asterisk. The video continued, and my son's words cut deeper than any knife could. Every year on March 17th, you would disappear. Mom would tell me you were working, but I knew that wasn't true. I followed you once when I was 15. I watched you sit on that cliff for hours, staring at the ocean where she drowned. I watched you talk to her as if she could hear you. He was right. Every year, on the anniversary of my first wife's death, I would return to the cliff where she had fallen. A tragic accident during a storm. She had gone too close to the edge. I had made a promise as they lowered her coffin into the ground. I would return to that spot every year on that day, without fail, to remember her. And I had kept that promise for 22 years, even after remarrying, even after building a new life. My current wife understood and accepted this ritual, though I knew it pained her. I resented her for years, my son continued. This woman I never met who still had such power over our family. I resented you for keeping her memory so alive that sometimes it felt like she was more present than I was. He shifted in his seat, wiping a tear. But as I got older, I began to understand what true love means. How it doesn't just end when someone dies. How promises matter. Our fight 2 years ago, it wasn't really about my career choices like we both pretended. It was about me finally confronting you about her, and neither of us being ready for that conversation. I paused the video, needing a moment to breathe. He was right. Our final argument had spiraled from a discussion about him dropping out of college into an ugly confrontation about my first wife, about grief, about how her ghost had hovered over our family for decades. When I resumed the video, my son's expression had softened. I've had a lot of time to think, Dad, about life, about death, about what matters in the end. And I realized something. Your loyalty, even to someone who's gone, is one of your greatest strengths. It's something I admire about you, even when it hurt me. Update 3 asterisk. So I made a decision, my son continued. If something happened to me, I didn't want to be the reason you broke your promise. That's why I left specific instructions about the funeral date. I knew Mom would follow them without questioning why. I knew you wouldn't attend if it fell on March 17th. And I knew everyone would hate you for it. He leaned closer to the camera. But I want you to know that I forgive you, Dad. For everything. And I'm asking you now to share this video with the family. Let them understand. Let them see that this was my choice, not yours. He smiled sadly. I hope you kept your promise. I hope you went to the cliff that day and talked to her like you always do. And I hope that next year, you'll talk to me too. Tell me about your day. Tell me about the family. Keep me alive in your heart, just like you did with her. The video ended with my son looking directly into the camera. I love you, Dad. I always have. And I'm sorry we lost so much time to misunderstanding. I sat in my office for hours after the video ended, replaying it, absorbing every word. Then I sent a mass text to my family, asking them to come to my house the following evening. I didn't explain why. I just said it was important. To my surprise, they came. My ex-wife, my daughter, my parents, my siblings. They sat in my living room, faces hard with judgment and grief. No one spoke as I set up my laptop and played the video. The transformation as they watched was profound. Anger gave way to shock, then to understanding, and finally to tears. When it ended, the silence in the room was heavy with regret. My ex-wife was the first to speak. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think the worst? Would you have believed me? I asked. Without this video, would any of you have accepted that he wanted it this way? They knew the answer. Of course they wouldn't have. They would have seen it as an excuse, a way to justify my absence. Update 4 asterisk. That night changed everything. The healing wasn't immediate. How could it be? But it began. My daughter hugged me before she left, the first physical contact we'd had since before the funeral. My brother awkwardly patted my shoulder. My mother kissed my cheek and whispered, I'm sorry. In the weeks that followed, we started to rebuild. We shared stories about my son, remembering the good times rather than dwelling on the estrangement. We talked about misunderstandings, about how grief can manifest in strange and destructive ways. Yesterday was March 17th again. I went to the cliff as I always do. But this time, I brought my family with me, my current wife, my daughter, my ex-wife, even my parents. We stood together at the edge, watching the waves crash below. I spoke to my first wife as I always do, updating her on the year's events. And then, for the first time, I spoke to my son too. I told him about how his video had brought healing to our fractured family, how his final act had been one of profound understanding and forgiveness. As we stood there, my daughter slipped her hand into mine. Next year, she said, I want to hear stories about both of them. I nodded, unable to speak through the tightness in my throat. My son was right about loyalty being my strength. But he helped me realize it doesn't have to be directed at just one person, at just one memory. Love expands. Grief expands. There's room for all of it, for all of them. My family no longer thinks I'm a monster. They understand now that sometimes, keeping a promise is the most human thing we can do. My son understood that before any of us. In his final message to me, he didn't just offer forgiveness. He offered wisdom beyond his years. I still miss him every day. I still regret the 2 years we lost to misunderstanding and pride. But I'm grateful for his final gift to me. Reconciliation with my family and the knowledge that my son didn't die angry. He died having reached a place of understanding that many people never achieve in much longer lives. And every year on March 17th, I'll return to that cliff. I'll speak to both of them now, keeping their memories alive. Not as ghosts that haunt us, but as loved ones who shaped us, who continue to teach us even in their absence. My son's last video revealed the actual reason I missed his funeral. But more importantly, it revealed who he had become, a man capable of profound empathy and forgiveness. A man I wish I'd had more time to know, but one I'll always be proud to have called my son.